flycam glides over a frozen forest, and Amba has not entered the frame yet, giving the camera lowers toward a snowy slope between the trees, and the terrain alone already hints that this shelter built dog walking down through the cold woods to search for the right place to settle. He pauses among the tall trunks, scanning the area carefully as if measuring wind, cover. Amba steps into a more open field, the patch of ground that will soon become the center of all. A massive tree stump stands in front of him, and one look is enough to tell it may become the anchor for the shelter. He circles the large stump and studies the area around it, quietly claiming this spot as the Amba crouches to remove grass, snow, and loose debris, clearing the ground before the real. A low angle frames Amba and the dog beside the giant stump, like two companions about to settle into. He stands there for one more moment near the trunk, making sure this is exactly where the shelter. Amba drags a long log into the field, and from that point on, the build becomes. He brings in another trunk, using what the forest offers instead of searching for anything close. The smaller branches and top are cut away, so the log can be shaped into something more useful. Amba sits low and begins trimming the wood surface, making the main pole cleaner and easier to. He lifts the pole near the big stump and tests the position, already imagining the first line. Amba shifts the log back and forth, checking angles carefully because one bad start can throw off. In close-up, he begins carving a notch into the wood, preparing the first joining point. The blade bites into the log in a steady rhythm, showing patience instead of haste in the freezing cold. Amba picks up a thick round block of wood, likely using it as a support surface while shaping the join. He keeps trimming the end of the pole, making sure it will settle properly without catching or twisting. The notch is now clearly visible, and it becomes one of the most important contact points in the Amba frame. Returns to the giant stump, testing the shape end against the support he chose earlier. He presses the log into place, checking whether it finally sits right or still needs more shaping. Amba keeps adjusting the fit bit by bit, working like someone who will not ignore even a small. He moves around behind the stump and drags in another trunk, deciding the frame will need more support. Amba hauls the long trunk through the snow and brush, pushing forward with quiet determination. In close-up, the knife returns, stripping bark and shaving off anything that might get in the way. He trims the end of a second pole, because even rough-looking pieces have to fit properly in a good shape. Amba walks off carrying a long pole over his shoulder, a clear sign that the structure is about. He brings more material into the field, and the work area now looks like a small workshop. Amba studies a freshly cut piece in his hand, checking whether the joint is finally shaped the way he wants. He uses the stump as a natural workbench, squaring off the end of the pole with careful cuts. Another small adjustment follows, because weak joints here would mean trouble higher up later. Amba keeps working at the stump, using the post itself as support. In close-up, he carves into a thicker pole, removing every awkward bump that might fight the frame. The blade moves slowly along the grain, the kind of careful work that prevents bigger problems. The camera rises briefly toward the treetop, a pause before the frame building truly begins. Amba carries out a beam top, revealing that the roof line is finally coming together. He walks with the sheet in his hands, already judging how it will need to fall against snow. A wide shot of the scattered materials shows the setup is ready, and now the pile of wood has to. The camera drifts past the snowy canopy and returns just as Amba begins placing the first. He cuts another short pole, preparing the smaller locking pieces for the upper frame. The first roof beam is set from the big stump to the next side, and the lean-to shape finally. Amba aligns the second beam parallel to the first, making the shelter's overall form much easier. He crouches and carves a notch into a smaller log, preparing another lock point for the upper structure. Amba continues shaping the joint in close-up, doing the tiny work that will matter later. He wraps cord around two crossing poles, beginning to tie the frame together with simple but Amba cinches the knot tight, because one slipping joint could weaken the whole roof. In close-up, he adds more cord around the connection and nudges the beam into exactly the right position. Amba pulls the line hard, finishing one of the most important lashings in the frame. He tightens the joint again for extra security, the kind of caution that pays off on temperature. Amba climbs onto the frame to correct the alignment, showing that the structure is already strong enough. Another long pole goes across the top, making the roofline fuller and noticeably stronger. He keeps working high above the ground, locking each connection so the frame will not shift later. Amba stands on the main beam to adjust spacing, a confident move that says he already trusts. The camera cuts to the open snowy hillside for a brief pause, then returns to the shelter. The shelter already looks surprisingly capable, a lean-to taking shape around a giant stump. Snow becomes more visible on the ground and branches, and the video fully settles into a winter. Amba re-enters under the first snowfall, working as though weather is only one more obstacle. He circles the structure again, preparing for the next big phase, closing in the roof. Amba carries in thin, straight poles, using them as cross slats to support the future roof gutter. The first few slats are laid across the frame, turning the open skeleton into a real roof slate. He adds one slim pole after another, and with each piece the shelter is completed. Amba adjusts the spacing between the slats, because a roof that is too open is barely protected. More thin poles fill in the gaps, and the top finally looks ready to support a full cover. From this angle, the shelter looks convincing, no longer like a lucky stack of poles in the roof. Amba sits on top of the latter section, testing its strength before adding the weight. He crawls along the roof like a careful builder, not someone simply hoping the wood will hold. From below, the roof lattice already appears dense and solid, especially against the darkening. Amba pulls a silver gray cover across the top, officially beginning the weatherproof. He places a heavy log on the edge of the cover, using simple weights to keep it from moving. Amba stands on the frame and smooths the cover flat, making it clear this shelter is built to. Now he spreads not green tarp over the roof, adding a second layer and turning it into a more weatherproof. Amba pulls the top lower toward the front, trying to stop wind and snow from driving straight inside. He works from outside toward the entrance, locking down each stubborn edge that still wants to. Amba adjusts the front opening as well, balancing protection with enough space to move in and out. The shelter now has a clean and practical shape, looking like a place that could actually carry. The words "Day 2" appear, showing that the first night has passed and the build is still evolving. Morning reveals the shelter buried under fresh snow, making it look completely different from the day before. A shot through the white forest shows the structure still standing firm, already a reassuring sight. The dog appears near the shelter like a quiet little guard, while Amba is already back at work. The front of the shelter is visible beneath the snow, proving that yesterday's weatherproofing held up well. Looking up from under the roof, the slats and tarp still keep their shape, which says a lot. Amba ducks inside briefly, checking the sleeping area after the first full night under the shelter. Still beneath the roof, he looks over the interior again, making sure everything remains stable. Amba sits with gloves and tools in hand, starting the day by improving the shelter rather than. He grabs another long pole, showing that this morning is for reinforcing, not relaxing. Amba grabs in more swing tracks, preparing to strengthen the front edge and weak points near the roof. He sits low in the snow and saws one into shorter pieces. Small work, but the kind in close-up, the saw cuts through frozen wood, a reminder that the cold never leaves. Amba lifts another short trunk and carries it back to the shelter, moving like the task list is. Under the roof, he slides the new piece into place, closing in the front area even more. A quick cut to the snowy trail sharpens the feeling of cold outside. Before the camera returns, Amba keeps sawing another section to length, because these reinforcements need to fit neatly if he pins the pole under his knee and cuts, using steady, efficient movements that conserve energy. Amba carries the cut piece back to the shelter, filling weak openings one by one. He returns with still more material, a sign that this reinforcement phase demands. Amba braces another piece under the roof, making the front structure feel tighter and more deliberate. In close-up, he trims one more hand for a better fit, because even hidden details matter in Amba completes another section under the roof, and the entrance now looks cleaner and more enclosed. He climbs up again and shapes a. Likely preparing a locking piece for the upper structure. Amba keeps refining the peg, the kind of tiny part no one notices until it holds. A close-up from below reveals a slot near the roof line, clearly something he is treating. Amba splits another piece of wood, keeping the work moving at a steady pace. The camera drifts over the snowy roof for a moment, then returns as the shelter starts. He grabs it and cuts another full section, preparing one more locking piece for the front. Amba fits and ties additional slats under the roof, and the whole front now looks sturdier. He keeps working in the same area, refusing to stop before it looks exactly right. Amba shoulders another long pole, moving with the calm focus of someone who knows the job is not done. The shelter now stands in the snowy woods with a much tighter front, showing that day, too, the front under snow already looks impressive, and Amba now turns to strengthening the outer roof itself. He stands in the snow looking up at the roof, checking for any weak spots before locking the outer shelter. Amba pulls another pale covering across the front, creating an extra barrier against wind and sun. He climbs onto the roof with a bundle of branches or covering material, beginning an important Amba walks across the top with surprising confidence, adding layers to make the roof stronger. He kneels on the roof to arrange the material more evenly, and the shelter suddenly starts to feel Amba keeps adjusting the roof surface from above, trying not to leave any small area exposed. In close-up, he cuts another small wooden peg, probably to secure the new roof material. The knife moves through wet, snowy wood again, because the closer the build gets to finish, the more careful. Amba completes another small fix along the roof edge, making sure the top will not loosen. A wide shot shows the full shelter in the winter landscape, and now it's sealed with ribbon. Amba continues moving around the roof, still not willing to pull it through too early. He sits on top and trims more material, where appearance and strength have to become the same thing. Amba presses the covering down lower, keeping the roof compact so snow will not collect too easily. The knife works over another small wooden piece, because little locking pins keep the larger leg. He drags a thicker pole into the front edge, likely to create a stronger brace across the shelter. Amba ducks under the roof to adjust things from the inside, turning the shelter from something he stays undercover, refining the front into something making the entrance neater and easier to manage. Back near the main stump, Amba sharpens another stake, preparing for the final locking work. He shapes the bottom of the stake close to the ground, taking care of the kind of detail that prevents trouble. Inside the shelter, Amba checks everything once again before climbing back to the roof. In close-up, he trims another small piece of wood, keeping up the chain of tiny but critical. The snowy forest returns for a quiet pause. Then the camera comes back to the roofline where the final snow-covered trees stand still under a gray sky, making the shelter beside them feel. Amba shapes another peg while sitting on the roof, getting ready for the more final step of driving. He keeps shaping the peg narrow, making sure it will drive smoothly into place. Amba takes up a heavier striking tool and begins hammering the peg down to truly lock the roof. He keeps pounding with force, because if this section fails, the entire upper layer becomes questionable. Amba delivers several more hard blows, and the roofline immediately feels more secure. A close shot at the final roof ridge shows it thick, sheer, and solid. The snowy woods return again like a quiet signal that the build is entering its final chapter. From above, the roof now carries multiple layered materials, almost like a giant net. Amba uses a long pole to smooth and compress the roof surface, flattening it so snow will He keeps dragging and leveling the top, because a good roof needs both thickness and runoff. Amba returns with a larger beam for the front, starting the final process of locking down the He positions the beam and begins tying it in place, creating a strong edge across the front opening. Amba tightens the lashings around the front hole, binding the shelter face into the main structure. He presses the beam into place once more, making sure it is fully seated before letting go. A wide shot of the shelter with the green front flap looks genuinely impressive.
Amber walks
Real
around the
overnight
roof again,
refuge,
checking
in the
for anything
snow.
that still needs attention.
He adjusts the green entrance flap, making it more weatherproof without ruining access. Anba keeps working the cord and tarp edge at the entrance, finishing the most visible part of
From
the shelter. Outside, the shelter now looks nearly complete, especially with the triangular green
The light
doorway.
grows colder and dimmer, and Anba remains outside for one last careful inspection.
Blue-purple dusk makes the shelter look even more cinematic, the kind of winter bushcraft scene.
From inside, looking out, the entrance already feels more enclosed and mountain-like.
Outside, darkness begins to take over, and Amba shifts into the nighttime living room. He moves inside the doorway in the fading light, preparing the area where fire and gear will carry. The camera lingers on the dark forest for a moment, making the isolation around the shelter. Amba is only faintly visible in the shadows, showing that the story continues even after the frame becomes almost black. Then Anba's hands appear holding a lantern. He turns and adjusts the lantern on the wooden floor, handling it with the care reserved.
The lantern glows brighter in his hand, and instantly the shelter feels warmer. Anba keeps tightening and securing the lamp, not willing to let that little light fade. The lantern is set near the entrance, glowing in the darkness like a single eye in the forest. Anba lets it burn while he keeps working, creating just enough light for what still needs to be done. The dark blue sky appears briefly, as if the wood has quietly down before the fire ignites.
The darkness lingers for another beat, making the shelter feel more isolated and self-contained. Anba kneels in the snow in front of the entrance, beginning to organize materials for a handmade fire. He arranges small branches and fire materials, setting up a stage that always carries tension. Anba stays low by the doorway, adjusting the stone fire area and the little work platform beside. He places stones and wood in order, turning the spot outside into a neat and usable fire.
Anba keeps refining the fire setup, making it cleaner and safer piece by piece.
In close-up, his hands place dry material near the stones, because even a good fire needs to light. Anba brings out a bundle of fine dry twigs, something simple that suddenly becomes precious.
He breaks the twigs into finer tinder, building the nest that will have to catch the first ember. Anba keeps working the tinder patiently, knowing fire rarely rewards rushing.
In another close-up, the tinder bundle is teased apart even more, preparing for the critical moment.
Round 5 will be spindle, making it clear he will start the fire by friction.
Anba sets the spindle into the fireboard, and everything is ready for the slow, suspenseful start. The spindle begins to turn against the wood, a small motion carrying a lot of pressure.
Anba keeps steady pressure on the spindle, nurturing the dark dust like a fragile chance. He continues to friction without pause, and the possibility of a real ember grows stronger.
At last, a tiny ember catches exact reward that makes all the slow effort. First flame is transferred into the stone fire area, and the shelter finally gains a real
Amba
heart
feeds in
for
small
the
dry
night.
twigs, growing the fire carefully instead of rushing it. He sits beside the fire and watches it settle, making sure the flame is strong before resting.
Amba reaches into the shelter and pulls out his sleeping bag or blanket, beginning the softest stage. He settles into the sleeping space by the fire, an image that makes all the earlier labor feel
From
worth it.
inside looking outward, the frozen forest now feels shut out beyond the doorway. A small wooden tray of sausage or meat appears near the fire, and the night meal begins.
Amba cuts and arranges the food on the board, simple ingredients handled with the same care as
He
the
divides the
shelter
pieces
itself.
into roasting size, setting up a quick but satisfying meal. Amba adjusts each piece by hand, making them easier to skewer and cook evenly. A long skewer pierces through the meat, marking the moment when work finally turns into a meal. Amba adds more pieces to the skewer, and the meal begins to look rustic but irresistible.
He moves the skewer over the fire, letting heat and smoke take over.
The meat slowly browns over the red coals, and even on screen it looks like it would smell amazing. Amba turns the skewer slowly, keeping the outside golden without scorching it. The finished bird looks surprisingly tidy, a satisfying ending to a hard winter day.
Amba begins eating inside the shelter, and in that moment, the temporary build finally feels
He takes the first bite slowly, like someone who knows he earned every part of the meal.
Amba keeps eating under the roof, and the warmer it feels inside, the colder the forest outside.
He raises another bite, and the whole meal softens after too much physical effort. The fire outside the doorway returns from close-up, a reminder of what is really carrying on.
Amba pauses with food in hand, sinking into the rare peace that comes after a full day of labor. He reaches for another piece. And adjusts his posture, a simple movement that somehow makes the shelter more dark sky appear through the tree cover. A beautiful pause in the quiet forest. The deep blue darkness returns again, drawing the viewer back outside before returning to the Amba crouches beside the sleeping area inside, finally preparing for a full night's rest.
He pulls the sleeping bag and hangs up. It feels a little more comfortable now with the cloth behind him. Amba lies down fully inside the shelter, moving like someone who can finally stop working.
The triangular doorway and the shelter walls wrap around him, making the whole space feel calmer.
Amba shifts
and
once more
safer.
inside the bag, settling his body before going still.
He pulls the blanket or bag a little higher, because extra warmth is never wasted on a night like this. Amba lies still at last, and the shelter now looks like a cocoon, holding the whole day's effort.
A reddish glow
inside.
flickers beyond the doorway, as if the fire is keeping watch through the night. Morning arrives with even heavier snow outside, marking the beginning of a new day.
Snow clings thickly to the surrounding trees, and the view alone tells you how cold the night is.
From inside looking out beneath the roof, every layer of the shelter still appears to be green.
The roof surface shows clearly in the morning light, looking stronger and more deliberate than when it
The
first
camera
began.
moves
through the snowy woods like a breath, then returns as Amba begins one
He
last
trims a
small
branch in front of the
morning
shelter, cleaning up the path before leaving.
In close-up, Amba cuts the branch end cleanly, a small job that somehow tidies the
He
whole
walks along
frame.
the side of the shelter, checking the area like he wants to leave nothing careless behind. Amba steps back to the doorway one more time, unwilling to ignore even a loose detail.
Inside the shelter, a simple breakfast sits on a wooden plate. Starting the final quiet meal, Anba breaks and arranges the food on the plate. A modest breakfast that fits the whole fire by the doorway is very functional, because in weather like this, warmth still comes first. From inside the shelter, Anba leans back for a moment, stretching out one last bit of a pot of water is placed over the small stone fire, starting the easiest and most comfortable part. Anba holds a tea or coffee packet in front of her, preparing the tiny ritual that matters so much. He pours hot water into a metal mug, and even the motion itself feels warming. Anba sits inside the shelter holding the hot mug, looking exactly like someone who truly lived.
He takes the first
in
sip
what he
very
built.
slowly, letting the heat move from his hands back into his body.
Anba remains there, drinking and watching the fire. An ordinary moment that feels
The
deeply
fire outside burns
satisfying.
for one more beat, putting a last warm note on the morning routine. He holds the hot mug near the doorway, and his face now looks far more relaxed than on day one.
A gray winter sky and snow-covered treetops, quietly reminding us that the cold, snowy forest lingers for a few seconds, slowing the film before the final pattern. The camera tilts up to the sky one last time, then returns as Anba begins gathering gear inside
He
the
sits
shelter.
inside
Packing the smaller items first, keeping the same order and care that shapes the build.
The fire outside still burns steadily, making the departure feel calmer and less harsh. Anba keeps sorting gear in the tight space, moving with the same control as before. He bends down to gather more bedding and lining, getting ready to roll the sleeping setup into one bundle.
Anba pulls cord tight around the rolled bedding, leaving camp with the same neatness he built. The cord is tightened further around the bundle, showing that packing out matters almost as much as Anba uses snow or water to put out the last of the fire. The final respectful step. He stands inside the shelter and looks around one last time, like a quiet farewell.
Outside, Anba and the dog appear again to track the second, and the departure soon begins.
The final shot lingers on the shelter in the snowy forest with a subscribe prompt. Like the video ends where Anba first transformed the clearing, leaving behind the feeling that this little shelter was genuine.